Hey guys, tonight we're taking a truly chilling journey deep into the heart of ancient Rome, a civilization famed for its colossal amphitheaters, its mighty legions, and its insatiable thirst for spectacle. But we're not focusing on the roaring crowds or the dramatic battles themselves. Instead, we're pulling back the crude linen curtains to uncover the brutal truth about gladiator training camps. Forget romanticized notions of valiant warriors fighting for freedom or a path to glory chosen by personal ambition. You're about to discover a grim reality where a man's destiny was irrevocably seized, condemning him to a lifelong path of intense physical pain, relentless discipline, and psychological torment, all for the fleeting applause of a bloodthirsty mob. This wasn't a glamorous calling. It was a human meat grinder, a brutal crucible designed to transform men into disposable entertainment. Frankly, you probably wouldn't survive the initial condemnation without longing for a swift, anonymous disappearance, let alone an entire career in the Ludus. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Tell me, where in the world are you tuning in from, and what time is it for you right now? Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You find yourself suddenly standing in the dusty, packed earth of a bustling marketplace in the Roman Empire. Perhaps in the city of Capua, a notorious center for gladiatorial schools. Sometime during the 1st or 2nd century CE, the air is thick with the pervasive smell of dust, sweat, livestock, and a palpable undercurrent of desperation that clings to the marginalized. You are a man, perhaps young and strong, but your life has just taken a catastrophic turn. You are about to become a gladiator. This is a forced calling, where your path leads you from freedom or another form of servitude directly into fetters, and your nightmare truly begins. The reasons why a man would find himself condemned to the brutal life of a gladiator were varied, but all led to a shared, horrifying fate. The vast majority of gladiators were slaves, prisoners of war, or condemned criminals. Their journey into the arena was rarely, if ever, a choice. Slaves serve the largest source of gladiators. Imagine being born into servitude, your life owned by another from the moment of your first breath, or perhaps you were captured in a Roman conquest, a free barbarian warrior fighting for your homeland, only to be dragged in chains across the empire, your freedom utterly stripped away. For you, the slave, the gladiatorial school Ludus was simply another, more extreme, form of exploitation, a place where your life would be literally worked away, or more accurately, fought away, for the profit of your owner, the lanista, and the entertainment of the Roman masses. This was a direct, brutal commodification of human life. Imagine being bought and sold like cattle, knowing your ultimate purpose was to die for sport. It truly sucked to be property. Prisoners of war captivi. Many gladiators were men who had bravely fought against Roman legions, only to be defeated and enslaved. Their military skills, once a source of pride, were now brutally repurposed for Roman entertainment. Imagine having fought valiantly for your people, only to be forced to kill your former comrades, or die for the amusement of your conquerors. This was a profound humiliation, turning your martial prowess into an instrument of your own subjugation. Condemned criminals damnati ad ludum, damnati ad bestias, instead of a swift execution. Those who committed serious crimes from major theft to rebellion, murder, or even offenses against the emperor could be sentenced to the arena. This was often considered a fate worse than death by many, a slow, agonizing demise inflicted by endless toil in the training school and eventual violent spectacle. Those condemned ad ludum were trained as gladiators, given a chance, however slim, to fight for survival. Those condemned ad bestias were simply thrown to wild beasts, often unarmed, as pure fodder for the crowd's bloodlust, facing immediate, gruesome death without even the dignity of being a trained fighter. Imagine a judge, with a stern face, pronouncing your sentence, sealing your fate to a living tomb where your death would be a public performance. It truly sucked to have your justice be a death sentence delivered by a lion or a sword. However, a small, often romanticized segment of gladiators were volunteers, known as octorati. These were free men who, driven by desperate poverty, immense debt, or a thirst for fame, however fleeting and dangerous, willingly sold themselves into gladiatorial service for a fixed period. Typically for a few years, they would sign a contract, an octoramentum, swearing a chilling oath to endure, to be burned, to be bound, to be beaten, and to be killed by the sword. Imagine being so utterly desperate, so without options, that you would willingly swear such an oath, surrendering your freedom and body for a few years of potential wealth and fleeting glory, knowing the immense risk involved. This highlights the brutal economic realities of the Roman Empire, where freedom sometimes meant choosing your own form of servitude, and desperate men chose the brutal path of the arena over slow starvation. Regardless of how you arrived, your first destination would be the Ludus, the gladiatorial training school. These were not glamorous academies or open military barracks. They were essentially prisons, meticulously designed to break your spirit, strip away your former identity, and transform you into a ruthless, efficient killing machine. Imagine massive, high stone walls, reinforced gates, and constant armed guards patrolling the perimeter and the interior. Your life, from this moment on, was dictated by the lanista, the owner and manager of the Ludus, who had invested heavily in your acquisition and expected a significant return on his investment. He held absolute power over your life and death, your health, and your very existence. Your new home was a cage, albeit one where you were constantly being honed into a weapon. Within the Ludus, discipline was absolute and brutal, enforced by the doctors, gladiatorial trainers. Often former gladiators themselves and custodes, guards. You would be subjected to harsh physical punishments for any infraction in subordination, laziness, a moment of weakness, or even minor mistakes during training. Beatings with whips, flagella, cudgels, confinement in dark cells, or reduced rations were common. Your body, already likely weakened by captivity, poverty, or the trauma of war, would now be pushed to its absolute limits. Constantly aching, perpetually tired, and relentlessly battered. This wasn't about building strength through positive reinforcement. It was about instilling absolute, unquestioning obedience through fear, pain, and systematic dehumanization. It truly sucked to be constantly afraid of your own teachers. The very act of entering the Ludus was a profound act of dehumanization. You were stripped of your former name, your social status, and your civilian identity. You would be given a new gladiator name, often a stage name, reinforcing your new role as a performer and a commodity. Your clothes would be replaced by rough training tunics. Your past, your family, your dreams all were expected to be left behind, replaced by the singular purpose of survival and performance in the arena. You became a functional unit, a weapon in the lanista's arsenal. One common misconception is that all gladiators were muscular, perfectly fit specimens from the start of their training. In reality, they came from incredibly diverse backgrounds, often malnourished, injured, or simply untrained. The Ludus was where they were systematically broken down and then rebuilt, not necessarily into aesthetic ideals, but into functional fighting machines, using specific, often brutal, training regimens designed to maximize their resilience and combat effectiveness. Their transformation into powerful gladiators was a testament to the rigorous, often cruel, training they endured, not necessarily their initial physical state. Historians still meticulously study archaeological findings from gladiatorial cemeteries like the one unearthed at Ephesus, Turkey, which provided skeletal evidence of injuries and diet, Roman medical texts like Galen's writings, which drew heavily from his experience in a gladiatorial school, and detailed historical accounts like those of Seneca or Martial to understand the precise training methods, daily lives, and psychological impact of the transition from civilian or soldier to gladiator. This research often reveals a more brutal and less glamorous reality than popular romanticizations. Furthermore, the initial purpose of gladiatorial combat itself highlights its brutal origins. Gladiatorial games originated from funerary rites, where armed combat was performed at the funerals of prominent aristocrats, believed to be a sacrifice to the dead or a way to honor the deceased. Over centuries, they evolved into massive public spectacles, but the underlying element of violence and death, originally linked to human sacrifice, persisted. Your life as a gladiator was effectively a perpetual offering to the Roman crowd's insatiable thirst for blood and entertainment. The psychological toll of this initial phase, the utter loss of freedom, the systematic dehumanization, the constant threat of violence, and the realization of your grim, predetermined purpose would be immense. You would live with a pervasive sense of despair, hopelessness, and terror, knowing that your life was now entirely dictated by the will of others, destined for a violent end in the arena. This profound loss of autonomy and human dignity was the first, and perhaps most soul-crushing, of the horrors you were about to endure. So, your initiation into the life of a gladiator was a horrifying journey, plunging you from freedom or another form of servitude directly into fetters. This forced calling, whether as a slave, prisoner, or desperate volunteer, transformed you from a person into a commodity, destined for a life of brutal training and a near certain violent end, all for the entertainment of a bloodthirsty Roman crowd. This desperate, unwilling transformation was the first, and perhaps most profound, of the brutal truth about gladiator training camps. Having been forcibly ushered into the grim reality of the Ludus, you, the newly designated gladiator in training, were immediately plunged into a world of relentless, soul-crushing confinement. Forget open air and personal space. The Ludus prison was a formidable fortress designed not just to train, but to break your spirit and ensure absolute control, making your daily existence profoundly brutal. Imagine your new home within the gladiatorial school. It was far from a comfortable barracks or a civilian dwelling. A Ludus was essentially a fortified prison, specifically designed to house and control its valuable, yet dangerous, human commodities. Picture towering stone walls, often many feet thick, rising high above you, topped with guard towers and reinforced with massive gates that constantly clanged shut, severing your connection to the outside world. The air, thick with the pervasive smell of dust, sweat, raw leather, and the underlying scent of fear, constantly reminded you of your confinement. It truly sucked to have your new home be a high-security prison. Your living quarters would be grim and utterly devoid of comfort or privacy. You would be housed in small, cramped cells, cellulae, often no more than a few feet wide and long, Just enough space for a simple straw mattress or a hard wooden cot. These cells were typically arranged in rows, opening onto a central courtyard or a narrow corridor, creating a pervasive sense of being constantly observed. You would share this cramped space with at least one, sometimes several other gladiators, crammed together, their bodies aching, their spirits weary. Privacy was a non-existent luxury. Every aspect of your life, from eating to sleeping, was conducted in the constant, unavoidable presence of your peers. Imagine trying to find a moment of personal reflection or quiet solace in such a suffocatingly public, confined space. It truly sucked to be packed like sardines in a human sardine can. Sanitation was rudimentary at best, and often appalling. There were no proper latrines or flushing toilets as we know them. Human waste would often be collected in communal buckets, or simply discharged into primitive cesspits located within or adjacent to the cell blocks. These waste areas were rarely cleaned thoroughly, contributing to a pervasive stench of stale urine and feces that would permeate the air, especially in warmer weather. Water for washing would be limited and often drawn from communal wells that could be easily contaminated. Personal hygiene was minimal, leading to widespread body odor, skin infections, and rampant infestations of lice and fleas. Imagine living for months on end in a perpetually damp, dark, and reeking environment, constantly itching, constantly feeling dirty, with no escape from the pervasive filth. This constant exposure to unsanitary conditions turned your home into a breeding ground for deadly diseases. It really sucked to literally breathe in everyone else's waste. The darkness and dimness of the interior spaces would be pervasive. Your cell, designed for security, would have little to no natural light, perhaps only a small, high slit for minimal ventilation. Much of your time, even during the day, would be spent in perpetual gloom. And after dusk, your only illumination would come from flickering, smoky oil lamps or candles. This poor lighting made reading or any detailed tasks difficult, contributing to chronic eye strain and a general sense of oppressive confinement. The darkness would amplify your other senses, particularly the smell, making the experience even more viscerally unpleasant and disorienting. The very design of the Ludus was intended to break your spirit and systematically strip away your former identity. From the moment you entered, your name might be replaced with a gladiator name, often a stage name. Reinforcing your new role as a performer and a commodity, your clothes would be replaced by rough training tunics. Your past, your family, your dreams, your personal autonomy, all were expected to be left behind, replaced by the singular purpose of survival and performance in the arena. You became a functional unit, a weapon in the Lannista's arsenal, nothing more than a valuable piece of property to be honed and utilized. This dehumanization, though pervasive, was seen as necessary to create the perfect, obedient fighter. It really sucked to have your identity erased. Security was absolute and ever-present. The Ludus was constantly monitored by armed guards, custodes, often former soldiers or veteran gladiators, who patrolled the corridors, watched the training grounds, and oversaw the cell blocks. Escape attempts were rare and met with severe, brutal punishment. Chains and fetters were used during transport or for particularly rebellious individuals. Your entire existence was under constant surveillance, ensuring strict adherence to discipline and preventing any attempts at mutiny or flight. Imagine living every moment under the watchful eyes of ruthless guards, knowing that any perceived transgression could lead to agonizing physical punishment. It truly sucked to be perpetually watched. The noise from the training arena would be a constant, unsettling soundtrack to your life in the Ludus, the clang of metal on metal, the grunts of exertion, the shouts of the doctors' trainers, and the cries of pain from injured gladiators all would echo through the walls of your cell, serving as a chilling reminder of the brutal combat that defined your future, even in the infirmary, which we'll explore in later chapters. The sounds of suffering would be pervasive, ensuring that the atmosphere of violence was never truly absent. One common misconception is that all gladiatorial training camps were uniform across the Roman Empire. In reality, while basic principles of design and management were similar, the size, resources, and specific conditions of a ludus could vary significantly. Larger, imperial-owned schools like the Ludus Magnus in Rome might have had slightly more structured facilities, but even these were fundamentally prisons, smaller. Privately owned schools might be even more rudimentary and brutal, driven purely by the lanista's profit motive. However, the overarching theme of confinement, harsh conditions, and rigorous discipline remained consistent. Historians still meticulously study archaeological findings from various ludus sites, e.g., cell blocks, training arenas, infirmaries, Roman legal texts, e.g., digest or institutes which classify gladiators as property, and ahistorical accounts like those from Seneca or Martial that offer glimpses into daily life to understand the precise design, management, and prevailing conditions of these gladiatorial training camps, consistently confirming their prison-like nature and brutal realities. Furthermore, the psychological toll of living in such a confined, unsanitary, and brutally disciplined environment cannot be overstated. You were constantly battling physical discomfort, a lack of privacy, pervasive filth, and the omnipresent threat of violence. This constant stress, this systematic stripping away of your dignity and individuality would slowly erode your spirit, leading to profound despair, apathy, or suppressed resentment. Your existence was reduced to a primal struggle for survival. Your mind focused solely on enduring the next training session, the next meal, the next moment of perceived safety. The confines of the ludus were designed to break you down, to make you compliant, and to prepare you for the ultimate performance in the arena where your life was on the line for entertainment. Your very thoughts became trapped within these walls. The very existence of such a place, where human beings were systematically broken and remade into fighting machines, reflected a chilling aspect of Roman society's entertainment culture. The value of human life was utterly subsumed by the demand for spectacle, and the ludus was the factory that produced the raw material for this brutal amusement. Your misery was a direct consequence of this societal demand, a silent price paid for the cheers of the Roman crowd. The omnipresence of armed guards and the strictness of the routine meant that any thoughts of escape were almost immediately crushed. The physical barriers were formidable, and the consequences of an escape attempt were horrifying, often leading to execution by crucifixion or being thrown to wild beasts. This extreme lack of freedom, this constant awareness of being utterly trapped, added another layer of profound psychological torture to your already brutal existence. You were destined for the arena, and there was no escape from your fate, except perhaps through death itself. So, your life as a gladiator began with imprisonment in the Ludus prison. Its towering walls, cramped and unsanitary cells, and pervasive atmosphere of fear were meticulously designed to break your spirit and transform you into an obedient fighting machine. This profound physical and psychological confinement, stripping you of your freedom and identity, was a defining, profoundly brutal aspect of gladiatorial training camps, ensuring that your path to the arena was a relentless, dehumanizing ordeal. Having been thrust into the unforgiving confines of the Ludus prison, Your life as a gladiator in training was immediately defined by the chilling reality of brutal discipline. Forget motivational speeches or fair consequences. Your existence was enforced by the constant threat of agonizing physical punishment, meticulously designed to break your will and ensure absolute obedience to the lanista, making your daily grind profoundly brutal. Imagine the pervasive fear that gnawed at you from dawn till dusk. Your instructors, the doctores were formidable figures, often grizzled former gladiators themselves, bearing the scars of countless arena battles. They were ruthless, unyielding, and absolute in their authority. They knew what it took to survive the arena, and they would spare no pain to instill that knowledge. Their commands were law, and their gaze was constantly upon you, scrutinizing your every movement, your every expression, seeking any sign of weakness, laziness, or defiance. It truly sucked to have your teachers be your tormentors. The primary tool for enforcing this iron discipline was physical punishment, administered without hesitation, without mercy, and often publicly to serve as a stark warning to others. The preferred instrument was typically the rudis, a sturdy wooden staff or rod, a blunt weapon that could inflict immense pain without necessarily killing, though severe injury was common. Imagine a centurion's vitus vine staff from the regular Roman legions. The rudis was its gladiatorial equivalent, wielded with equal, if not greater, brutality. Punishments for infractions were swift and agonizing, flogging and beatings. For minor infractions, a slow pace during training drills, a poorly executed maneuver, a moment of inattention, a whispered complaint, or even simply showing too much pain or fear, you would face immediate beatings. Imagine being seized by guards, forced to the ground, and lashed repeatedly with the rudis or heavy whip flagellum across your back, legs, or bare buttocks. The searing pain, the tearing flesh, the deep welts and bruises would be immediate and excruciating. You were expected to endure it silently, without crying out, without flinching, as any display of weakness would only invite further punishment. The dull thud of the staff on flesh, punctuated by the grunts of the punished, would echo through the Ludus, a constant, chilling soundtrack to your daily life. This wasn't about rehabilitation. It was about breaking your will and instilling absolute, unquestioning obedience through sheer terror. It really sucked to literally be beaten for a bad performance, confinement, and reduced rations. For more serious offenses or as a lesser punishment, you might be thrown into a small, dark, and often unsanitary confinement cell for days or weeks. Your already meager rations, as discussed in Chapter 5, the Gladiator diet, would be further reduced, exacerbating your hunger and weakness. This isolation and deprivation were designed to break your spirit and remind you of your complete powerlessness. Shackles and fetters during rest periods, or for gladiators deemed particularly rebellious or prone to escape attempts. Chains and fetters might be used to restrict your movement within your cell or even during certain training exercises. Imagine the constant chafing of iron against your skin, the oppressive weight, and the psychological burden of being physically restrained. A constant reminder of your enslaved status. Public humiliation. Many punishments were performed publicly in the Ludus courtyard, in full view of your fellow gladiators and the lanista. This was designed to serve as a stark warning, to instill terror, and to reinforce the absolute authority of the lanista and his doctores. Your pain and degradation were spectacles, lessons for all who witnessed them, ensuring that the fear of punishment permeated every corner of the training camp. This stripping away of dignity was a profound psychological torture, designed to utterly crush your self-worth. It really sucked to be shamed in front of your doom mates. This pervasive system of fear and physical discipline aim to systematically strip away your individuality and instill absolute, unquestioning obedience and conformity. You were reduced to a nameless cog in a vast, brutal fighting machine, expected to perform until you dropped without complaint, without a moment's rest beyond what was absolutely necessary, and without any thought of rebellion. The Laniste and Doctors cultivated an atmosphere of terror, ensuring that your human will was completely subjugated to the brutal realities of the arena. Your spirit, once free and defiant, would slowly be crushed under the unbearable weight of constant threats and physical agony, leaving you a hollowed-out shell, merely existing to fight and endure. The Doctors, your direct trainers, were themselves products of this brutal system, often former gladiators who had survived the arena's horrors. They embodied the ruthlessness and discipline necessary for survival. They understood the mindset of a fighter, but their methods were unyielding, designed to instill resilience and a profound indifference to pain in their charges. Their own scars served as grim reminders of the world you were training for, legitimizing their brutal methods as necessary for your survival and their Lanista's profit. This grim, pragmatic approach to training left no room for compassion. The quotas were relentless and often impossible to meet. Each gladiator, each training group, would have strict quotas for the number of drills performed, the intensity of their sparring, or the precision of their maneuvers. Failure to meet these quotas, regardless of your exhaustion, your hidden injuries, or your physical limitations, would result in immediate and often collective punishment. This could mean a reduction in your already meager rations, a mass flogging for the entire group, or additional hours of brutal, unpaid training. This constant pressure forced you to push yourself and your comrades to the absolute physical and mental brink, fostering a desperate competition for survival among the gladiators themselves, rather than true camaraderie. As every person was constantly evaluated, it really sucked to be punished for things you couldn't control, like your own body failing. One common misconception is that all gladiators were treated exactly the same way, or that Laniste were always just cruel, while brutality was central, and many Laniste were indeed ruthless businessmen. They also had a financial incentive to keep their gladiators alive and as healthy as possible within the brutal context of their profession. A dead gladiator was a financial loss, as was one too injured to fight. This meant that while discipline was severe, it was often calculated to maximize output and extend a gladiator's fighting career. Rather than simply to kill them quickly, the carrot of survival, however grim, was always implicitly present alongside the stick of punishment. This complex interplay of economic interest and brutal control is a key aspect of understanding gladiatorial training. Historians still meticulously study Roman legal codes, e.g., those relating to slaves and infamia, administrative documents detailing Ludus operations, procurement and training records, when available, and archaeological findings from gladiatorial schools, cells, training arenas, evidence of a clear, disciplined layout to understand the precise management practices and prevailing conditions of these training camps, consistently confirming their prison-like nature and the pervasive use of harsh, systematic discipline. Furthermore, the very physical environment of the Ludus amplified the effectiveness of this discipline. In the cramped, often dark cells and the confined training arenas, there was literally nowhere to hide from the overseer's gaze or the reach of his whip. The constant echoes would carry the screams of the punished, serving as a chilling auditory reminder to everyone nearby. This constant scrutiny, combined with the omnipresent threat of physical pain, ensured that you were always performing at your peak, regardless of your personal exhaustion or internal pain, leaving you with no respite. Your every movement was dictated, your very posture betraying your fear, all under the watchful eyes of your captors. The sheer dehumanization inherent in this system of discipline cannot be overstated. You were not a citizen, not a person with rights. You were a gladiator, a body, a tool to be used, broken, and discarded as needed. Your pain, your suffering, your eventual death, these were mere statistics in the Lanista's ledger, insignificant against the backdrop of the colossal profits generated by the gladiatorial games. This deliberate stripping away of human dignity, this reduction to a mere physical unit of labor and combat, was perhaps the most terrible cost of all. Endured with every disciplined step and every brutal lash, the constant fear eroded your spirit, leaving you perpetually vigilant, perpetually subservient, and perpetually miserable, knowing your entire existence was defined by the extraction of entertainment under duress. Your personal will was systematically broken, leaving only an obedient shell. The psychological toll of this constant exposure to violence, both threatened and actual, would be immense. You would live with a profound sense of anxiety, always anticipating the next beating, the next disciplinary action, this relentless pressure to perform flawlessly, to endure without complaint, and to suppress all natural human responses to pain and fear would lead to deep psychological scars, potentially resulting in chronic stress, apathy, or even a form of learned helplessness, making you a compliant, yet deeply broken, tool in the gladiatorial machine. Your transformation was complete when your fear became automatic and your obedience unquestioning. So your initiation into the life of a gladiator was defined by the pervasive and unyielding reality of brutal discipline, from relentless physical punishment and constant surveillance to overwhelming psychological pressure and systematic dehumanization. Every moment of your training was meticulously designed to break your spirit and ensure absolute obedience. This brutal enforcement, ensuring your body was forged into a weapon for entertainment, was a defining, profoundly brutal aspect of gladiatorial training camps, ensuring that your path to the arena was a relentless, dehumanizing ordeal, all orchestrated by the Lanista to maximize his profit from your suffering. Having been broken by the rigid discipline and relentless beatings of the Ludus prison, your daily existence as a gladiator in training was consumed by the grueling regimen. Forget varied workouts or periods of rest. Your days were a relentless cycle of physical conditioning, specialized combat drills, and repetitive strain, meticulously designed to transform you into a lethal weapon for the arena, making your training profoundly brutal. Imagine your workday beginning before dawn. You would be roused from your cramped, uncomfortable cell, your muscles already aching from the previous day's exertions. The air in the Ludus training yard, often an open-air, dusty or sandy space, would be thick with the smells of sweat, leather, and anticipation. Your doctoras trainers, formidable former gladiators themselves, would oversee every aspect of your physical conditioning, pushing you to your absolute limits without mercy. This wasn't about building a healthy body. It was about forging a machine designed for violence and endurance. It truly sucked to wake up only to be broken. The physical conditioning was relentless and intense. Running and endurance. You would spend hours running within the Ludus confines or designated training areas, often barefoot over rough, uneven ground. This was not for leisure, it was to build immense stamina. crucial for prolonged combat in the arena. You would run until your lungs burned, your legs screamed, and your body was utterly exhausted, pushing beyond your perceived limits day after day. Strength training. Your strength regimen involved lifting heavy weights, often rudimentary versions of dumbbells, heavy stones, or lead weights, or performing calisthenics body weight exercises like push-ups and squats, all designed to build raw power. You might carry heavy sacks of sand or practice dragging weighted objects, mimicking the effort of pulling a fallen opponent or maneuvering in heavy armor. Your muscles would be perpetually sore, straining to adapt to the constant demands. Jumping and agility exercises to improve agility, balance, and coordination were vital for dodging blows, maneuvering in close quarters, and avoiding being tripped in the arena. You would practice jumping over obstacles, performing quick changes of direction, and maintaining balance while carrying weights. This agility, while crucial for survival, placed immense strain on your joints. The heart of your training lay in specialized combat drills, meticulously tailored to the gladiatorial type armatura you were destined to become. This wasn't generalized fighting. It was a highly specific, deadly dance that you had to master through endless repetition. Training against the palace. This was a cornerstone of gladiatorial training. You would practice endlessly against a palace, a sturdy wooden post fixed firmly in the ground, armed with a heavy wooden training weapon, often twice the weight of an actual gladiatorial armament. You would strike and thrust at the post repeatedly, honing your technique, developing your stamina, and perfecting your form. Imagine hitting a heavy wooden post for hours, your shoulders burning, your hands blistering, your entire body aching with impact impact, trying to replicate the precise blows that would one day disable your opponent. This repetitive, high-impact training sculpted your body for combat. It truly sucked to fight a tree for your life. Mock combat armature. You would engage in fierce mock combat sessions against other trainees, using blunted wooden weapons and sometimes rudimentary protective gear. These were not gentle sparring matches, while the aim was to practice techniques rather than inflict serious harm. Injuries were common. You would learn to take a blow, to fall effectively, to absorb impact, and to fight through pain and exhaustion. The doctors would oversee these sessions with an eagle eye, quick to correct mistakes with the Rudy's staff used for punishment or a sharp, stinging verbal reprimand. The psychological pressure to perform, to not show weakness, and to prove your worth against your peers was immense, fostering an intense, often brutal, rivalry. Weapon specialization. If you were to be a murmillo, you'd master the heavy, oblong shield scutum for defense and the short sword gladius for thrusting. Your training would emphasize forming a defensive wall with your shield, then lunging. If a thraex, you'd learn the agility of a small, round shield parmula and the curved, slashing dagger seca, emphasizing quick, deceptive attacks. If a retiarius, you'd spend countless hours perfecting the throw of a heavy net ret and the precise thrust of a long trident fusina. Your training would emphasize speed, agility, and the skill to entangle your opponent before he could close in. Your lack of armor meant your survival hinged entirely on your elusive footwork and weapon accuracy. Each class required unique and demanding physical skills, pushing your body in different ways, but always towards lethal efficiency. The monotony and repetition of this grueling regimen were profound. Day after day, week after week, month after month. You performed the same drills, the same exercises, the same combat movements. There was little variation, little time for personal pursuits, and no escape from the relentless cycle of physical exertion. Your existence was reduced to a disciplined grind, your body a tool to be honed for the arena. leaving little room for individuality or personal expression. It truly sucked to be endlessly trained like a dog. The physical toll of this relentless regimen was immense and cumulative. Your muscles would be perpetually aching, strained from constant heavy lifting and repetitive impacts. Your joints would suffer from the continuous pounding and strain, leading to chronic pain, premature arthritis, and potential long-term damage. Your hands would be blistered, calloused, and often raw from gripping crude tools and weapons. Your body would be in a constant state of weariness, slowly breaking down under the pressure of unceasing exertion. This wasn't just discomfort, it was a systemic erosion of your physical health, chipping away at your resilience. The lack of safety precautions exacerbated the danger. There were no safety glasses to protect from flying splinters, no proper padding beyond rudimentary wraps, and no modern protective gear. Accidents were common during mock combat or heavy training, leading to cuts, sprains, broken bones, and concussions. These injuries, even if not immediately fatal, could prematurely end your career or lead to chronic pain and disability, leaving you a burden on the lanista who might then dispose of you. It truly sucked to risk serious injury every single day. One common misconception is that all gladiatorial training was about making men into beefy, muscular brutes, while strength was important. Emphasis was often placed on endurance, agility, and the ability to absorb or evade blows. Depending on the gladiator type, the aim was to create a resilient, efficient fighter who could provide entertainment in the arena, not necessarily a bodybuilder. Furthermore, gladiators were trained to inflict spectacular, often non-fatal, wounds like deep gashes in the legs or arms that would bleed profusely but allow the fight to continue dramatically to prolong the entertainment. Their training thus focused on techniques that would both disarm, incapacitate opponents, and create visual spectacle. Historians still meticulously study Roman training manuals, fragmentary sources, archaeological findings from Ludus sites, e.g., training weapons, palace bases, and Roman medical texts like Galen's writings on gladiatorial injuries to understand the precise training methods, specific drills, and the physical outcomes of the gladiatorial regimen, confirming its highly demanding and often brutal nature, designed to produce performers, not just killers. Furthermore, the diet of the gladiators, which we'll discuss more fully later, but briefly mentioned as a high-carb diet in the episode Why Being a Gladiator in the Roman Empire Actually Sucked, was specifically designed to fuel this immense physical exertion and to create a subcutaneous layer of fat for protection, while providing calories. It was often monotonous and lacked varied nutrients, potentially contributing to underlying deficiencies that undermined overall health. Even as it fueled performance, your body was being optimized for combat, not holistic well-being. The psychological toll of this brutal training was immense. You would live with perpetual exhaustion, your muscles constantly aching, your mind consumed by the need to push harder, to perform flawlessly, and to endure every pain without complaint. The constant pressure from your doctor is the fierce competition with your peers, and the unwavering expectation for victory and survival would create a profound sense of anxiety and mental strain. Your dedication to your craft transformed your life into a continuous cycle of physical and mental agony, all for the elusive chance at fleeting glory in the arena, where your life was perpetually on the line. The atmosphere in the Ludus was designed to strip away your former identity and to break your will. The rigorous training was part of this process, ensuring that your body and mind were completely subjugated to the demands of the lanista and the spectacle, you were being remade, not for your own benefit, but for the entertainment of thousands. And the process was agonizingly thorough. Your individual desires, your personal limits were systematically ignored in the relentless pursuit of ultimate fighting efficiency. So, your daily life as a gladiator in training was defined by the grueling regimen, from relentless physical conditioning and specialized combat drills against the palace and fellow trainees, to the monotonous repetition of lethal movements and the pervasive threat of training injuries. Every aspect of your existence was consumed by the pursuit of fighting prowess, this physically destructive and profoundly demanding toil, designed to forge you into a weapon for the arena, was a defining, profoundly brutal aspect of gladiatorial training camps, ensuring that your path to combat was paved with immense sweat, pain, and constant physical erosion. Having been broken by the rigorous discipline and relentless regimen of the Ludus, your life as a gladiator in training now revolved around a peculiar and often unappetizing culinary reality, monotonous diet. Forget diverse. Gourmet meals or a balanced athlete's plate, your sustenance consisted primarily of barley and beans, meticulously designed for specific combat resilience, not comfort or variety, making your daily grind profoundly brutal. Imagine your daily meals in the gladiatorial school, while you were certainly fed more consistently and perhaps more abundantly than a common Roman slave. Your diet was far from varied or palatable. The vast majority of your caloric intake came from grains, primarily barley hordeari. This was typically consumed as a thick, often bland, gruel or porridge, sometimes supplemented with beans or other legumes. Meat, if provided at all, was a rare luxury, perhaps served infrequently or reserved for special occasions or after a significant victory. This monotonous fare was your fuel, consumed day in and day out, month after month, year after year, with little to no variation. It truly sucked to eat the same bland mush every single day. The reason for this almost entirely vegetarian, high-carbohydrate diet was surprising and brutally pragmatic. It wasn't about moral or religious asceticism, though some gladiators did have specific religious affiliations. Instead, this diet was meticulously designed for specific physiological outcomes that benefited the lanista, owner, and the spectacle, building a protective layer of fat. The high-carbohydrate, plant-based diet helped gladiators develop a significant layer of subcutaneous fat. This wasn't about making them fat in an unhealthy sense that would hinder agility. Instead, this layer of fat acted as a kind of natural, internal padding. When a sword or trident struck, this layer of fat would absorb some of the impact, potentially preventing the weapon from immediately reaching vital muscles or organs, or at least making the wound less immediately fatal. This allowed gladiators to sustain visually dramatic, yet not instantly lethal, injuries, prolonging the fight and increasing the entertainment value for the crowd. Imagine literally being fattened up so you could bleed more spectacularly without dying instantly. It truly sucked to have your body optimized for dramatic injury. Promoting bone density. Archaeological evidence from gladiatorial cemeteries has revealed that gladiators had remarkably high bone density, often denser than that of other Roman populations. This is attributed to their diet and a special concoction known as bone ash or calcium drink. This was a bitter, gritty liquid made from plant ashes rich in calcium and other minerals mixed with water or vinegar. You, the gladiator, would consume this regularly, believing it strengthened your bones to withstand the immense impacts of combat and training. Imagine drinking a foul-tasting, gritty liquid made from burnt plant matter. specifically designed to make your bones harder so they wouldn't break as easily when struck. It really sucked to drink burnt trees for stronger bones. Energy for endurance. Carbohydrates are excellent sources of sustained energy. The high-carb diet provided the necessary fuel for the gladiators' incredibly intense and prolonged training regimens, as discussed in Chapter 4, and for the physically demanding nature of arena combat. However, despite these specific benefits for combat resilience, the gladiatorial diet was far from balanced by modern nutritional standards. The limited variety and scarcity of certain nutrients had their own drawbacks. Nutritional deficiencies, while providing ample calories and specific minerals, the diet could be deficient in other essential vitamins and minerals, A, E, G, some B vitamins. Specific amino acids, if not enough varied legumes, were consumed. So this could lead to subtle nutritional deficiencies over time, potentially affecting overall vitality and immune system. Even if not immediately obvious, monotony and palate fatigue. Eating the same bland gruel and tough biscuits day after day would lead to profound palate fatigue and a deep sense of boredom with food. Meals were purely functional, a necessary fueling, rather than an enjoyable experience. This continuous lack of culinary pleasure added to the psychological misery of your confinement. Dental issues. While the high calcium intake might strengthen bones, the consumption of coarse, sometimes gritty, barley, especially if prepared with primitive grinding methods, could still contribute to dental wear. The lack of proper oral hygiene meant that dental problems, though perhaps different from those of the wider Roman population, were still a source of discomfort. The control over your diet was absolute. You had no personal choice in what you ate. Every meal was prescribed, every portion measured, and every supplement administered by the doctors or medical staff, all under the strict oversight of the lanista. This lack of autonomy over even the most basic aspects of your life contributed to the pervasive misery of your existence. You ate what you were given, whether you liked it or not, because it was fuel for the spectacle. It really sucked to have your dinner plan be dictated by your owner. One common misconception is that gladiators were all perfectly muscular, lean athletes, resembling modern bodybuilders. In reality, while they were incredibly strong and highly conditioned, their physique was often different, characterized by a layer of subcutaneous fat and a powerful, dense build. Rather than the ripped appearance, their bodies were designed for specific functions in the arena: power, endurance, and the ability to take a hit dramatically, not for aesthetic perfection. This unique physique, a direct result of their specialized diet and training, is a fascinating detail that often surprises modern observers. Historians still meticulously study archaeological findings from gladiatorial cemeteries like the one unearthed in Ephesus, Turkey, where precise dietary analysis of skeletal remains, particularly bone isotope analysis, has confirmed they're primarily vegetarian. High carbohydrate and high calcium diet, as well as Roman medical texts like Galen's writings, which drew heavily from his experience in a gladiatorial school, and philosophical discussions like Pliny the Elder's mention of gladiators as barley eaters, to reconstruct their precise diets, health, and physiological adaptations for combat. Furthermore, the very act of preparing their food, though done by others, was also part of this brutal reality. The constant grinding of barley, the boiling of beans, and the preparation of bone ash concoctions would be done by other slaves or lower-ranking personnel in the Ludus, highlighting the vast network of labor that supported the gladiatorial system, all for the entertainment of the Roman masses. Your food and its preparation was a direct consequence of this massive exploitation. The psychological toll of enduring such a monotonous diet, despite the physical benefits it conferred for combat, would be immense. You would perpetually crave variety, fresh tastes, and the simple pleasure of choosing your own meal. The act of eating, stripped of all joy, became another form of discipline, another reminder of your confinement and your dehumanized status as a commodity. This pervasive culinary boredom added another layer to the misery of your daily grind, ensuring that your quest for survival was fueled by a profound lack of gastronomic satisfaction. So, your daily life as a gladiator was profoundly brutal due to its monotonous diet, consisting primarily of barley and beans, and supplemented by gritty, bone-ash drinks. This high-carb, vegetarian regimen was designed not for comfort or culinary delight, but for specific combat resilience and dramatic injuries. This peculiar and unappetizing fare, ensuring your body was optimized for the brutal realities of the arena, was a defining, profoundly miserable aspect of gladiatorial training camps, reducing your nourishment to a mere functional requirement for future spectacle. Having been shaped by the rigorous discipline and fueled by the monotonous diet of the Ludus, your training as a gladiator was a perpetual dance with danger. Forget minor scrapes. The very purpose of your existence meant confronting horrific injuries, from deep lacerations to shattered bones, from internal trauma to gruesome death, making every day in the training camp or arena a profoundly brutal and bloody reality. Imagine your typical day in the Ludus training yard, or more terrifyingly, your moments within the Colosseum itself. The sounds of metal clashing, the grunts of exertion, and the shouts of the Doctores trainers were your constant soundtrack. But underlying these sounds was the sickening thud of weapons hitting flesh and bone, the desperate cries of pain, and the chilling realization that your body was designed to be both the inflictor and the recipient of devastating trauma. This wasn't a game, it was a constant, visceral confrontation with extreme physical violence. It truly sucked to be perpetually covered in blood. Whether your own or someone else's, injuries were not rare occurrences, they were an expected, inherent part of gladiatorial life, both in the brutal training sessions and, more acutely, in the arena itself. Your body, despite its conditioning, was constantly pushed to its breaking point, enduring impacts and trauma that would cripple a normal man. The types of horrific injuries you would constantly witness, and likely suffer from, included lacerations and deep gashes. Swords like the Gladius short sword or Sika curved dagger were designed to cut and cleave. A direct hit could result in a deep gash tearing through skin and muscle, sometimes even severing tendons or small arteries. Imagine a wide, gaping wound on a gladiator's thigh, bleeding profusely, revealing the raw muscle beneath. These were visually dramatic injuries, prized for the spectacle they created in the arena, designed to both incapacitate and ensure a bloody show. The sight of your own flesh being ripped open, the searing pain, and the immediate gush of blood would be a terrifying reality. It truly sucked to have your body be a literal canvas for wounds. Puncture wounds, spears hastas, tridents, fusinae, and daggers pugiones were designed to pierce. These narrow, deep wounds could penetrate vital organs like the lungs, liver, or intestines, leading to severe internal bleeding, rapid internal infection, and often a slow, agonizing death that defied ancient medical understanding. Imagine a gladiator coughing up blood, his breath shallow and rattling, knowing a trident's prong had pierced a lung, causing him to slowly suffocate from internal bleeding. These invisible killers were particularly terrifying, their true damage hidden beneath the skin. Confounding any attempts at effective treatment, blunt force trauma maces male, war hammers, and the heavy bosses of shields could inflict devastating injuries even through armor. You would face concussions and skull fractures. A heavy blow to the helmet, even if it didn't penetrate, could cause a massive concussion, knocking a gladiator unconscious, leading to severe headaches, dizziness, memory loss, or even permanent brain damage. Skull fractures, whether visible or internal, were incredibly dangerous, risking brain swelling, bleeding, and almost certain death without modern neurosurgery. Repeated concussions from training and combat would lead to chronic neurological issues over time, a silent and insidious form of decay akin to modern CTE, broken bones. Fractures were rampant. Ribs, collarbones, arms, legs, hands, and feet were common sites of breaks from powerful blows, falls from chariots, or being slammed against the arena walls. Imagine manipulating a shattered limb, trying to set the bone with rudimentary splints. While your patient screamed in agony, unmedicated, improperly set bones would lead to permanent deformities, chronic pain, and limited mobility, ending a gladiator's career or leaving him crippled for life. Internal organ damage. A severe blow to the torso from a mace or shield could cause internal bleeding or rupture internal organs, leading to agonizing pain, shock, and a slow, agonizing death from peritonitis, inflammation of the abdominal lining, or hemorrhage, all hidden beneath an unbroken skin. These were the most frustrating cases for your medicus doctor, where your fellow gladiator would waste away, and little could be done. Being unhorsed or trampled. If you were a provocator or eques, mounted gladiators and were thrown from your horse, or if your chariot crashed, you risked being immediately trampled by other combatants or horses in heavy armor. You were essentially a helpless, overturned tortoise, vulnerable to crushing injuries, internal damage, or suffocation from hooves and wheels. This was a common and terrifying way to die or be severely injured in the Ludus or arena. Disfigurement and mutilation, repeated blows to the face in boxing, or specific injuries from weapons could lead to permanent disfigurement, broken noses, shattered teeth, grotesquely swollen ears like cauliflower ear in wrestlers, other boxers, and scarred faces were common hallmarks of a long gladiatorial career. Imagine having your face utterly mangled, your vision blurring, or your hearing fading. A permanent physical price for your athletic glory, the very design of gladiatorial weapons, while sometimes having specific ceremonial blunting like a coronal on a jousting lance in later medieval tournaments, were primarily designed to inflict injuries that were visually dramatic for the crowd. A cutlass, for example, was designed for slashing, causing superficial but very bloody wounds, designed to both incapacitate and entertain, increasing the entertainment value, even if it meant a longer, more painful recovery for the gladiator. Your body was a tool for spectacle, its suffering calibrated for maximum audience impact. It truly sucked to have your body be art for others. The volume and frequency of these horrifying injuries were overwhelming. After a major spectacle in the amphitheater, your Ludus infirmary, which we'll discuss in Chapter 7, would be flooded with dozens, if not hundreds, of wounded gladiators, all requiring immediate attention. You would witness the medicus and his assistants working tirelessly, often for hours or even days on end, moving from one bleeding, suffering body to the next, patching them up as best they could, knowing that many were beyond their help, and many others would succumb to the unseen enemy of infection. Even if they survived the initial intervention, this constant exposure to overwhelming suffering and predictable death would lead to immense compassion, fatigue, and desensitization for all involved. The lack of effective pain control was a constant horror. When a gladiator suffered a severe injury, his agony was raw, immediate, and overwhelming, beyond perhaps some strong wine, opium, or mandrake root, which were unreliable and often had dangerous side effects. There was no true anesthetic. He would scream, thrash, and bite down on a leather strap as the medicus stitched his wounds or set his broken bones. This public display of agony, even in the infirmary, served as a chilling reminder of the brutal cost of gladiatorial life. One common misconception is that all gladiators died in every fight, making medical care irrelevant. In reality, while death was always a real possibility, many fights ended with one gladiator being wounded and surrendering, hoping for missio mercy from the crowd or the editor. Gladiators were valuable assets, and their owners, Lanistae, had a strong financial interest in keeping them alive and fighting. This meant that the vast majority of gladiatorial combat resulted in injuries that required treatment rather than immediate fatalities, ensuring a constant demand for medical skills. Archaeological studies of gladiatorial cemeteries, like the one unearthed in Ephesus, Turkey, dating to the 2nd century CE, have provided compelling osteological evidence. Analysis of the bones shows a high incidence of trauma, healed and unhealed fractures, but also clear signs of widespread infections, gychai, osteomyelitis, or periostitis that were likely the ultimate cause of death for many. Rather than direct combat trauma, highlighting the devastating impact of unchecked infection. Historians still meticulously study these remains and Roman medical texts like Galen's writings, which drew heavily from his experience in a gladiatorial school to precisely quantify the mortality rates from combat versus infection. Furthermore, the psychological toll of repeatedly inflicting and enduring such brutal injuries would be immense. You would become intimately familiar with the anatomy of trauma, learning from every gruesome wound, but at the cost of your own emotional well-being. This constant immersion in pain and mortality, this desensitization to human suffering, would leave indelible scars on your psyche. You would either become deeply empathetic and thus constantly pained by the suffering you witnessed, or be forced to develop a chilling detachment, a necessary coping mechanism to survive your profession, but one that eroded your own humanity. Your mind would be a repository of gruesome images and desperate pleas, making true peace of mind elusive. The lack of modern hygiene and antiseptic practices exacerbated the lethality of every injury. An open wound in the arena or the infirmary was a direct pathway for bacteria into the bloodstream. Splinters from weapons, arena sand, and unsterile tools could introduce deadly pathogens. This meant that even a clean cut could quickly fester into a pus-filled abscess, leading to rampant infection and the terrifying threat of sepsis or tetanus, which often claimed lives days or weeks after the initial injury. Your survival after a wound was often a matter of immense luck, not reliable medical intervention. So, your daily life in a gladiator training camp was consumed by the relentless reality of horrific injuries. From deep lacerations and shattered limbs to internal organ damage and devastating concussions. You faced a constant parade of grievous, often disfiguring, wounds inflicted by the savagery of gladiatorial combat. This unending confrontation with extreme trauma, requiring crude interventions and causing agonizing pain, was a defining, profoundly brutal aspect of your training, ensuring that your path to the arena was paved with blood, guts, and shattered bones, even as your hands meticulously stitched gruesome wounds and battled unseen infections. Your expertise as a doctor for Roman gladiators extended beyond mere trauma care to encompass their unique diet and overall health management. Forget modern sports nutrition. Your task was to fuel these fighters, not necessarily to cure them holistically, making this aspect of your job profoundly horrifying. Imagine your daily duties in this Ludus as the sun rose. Long before the crowds gathered in the amphitheater, your patients, the gladiators, were not just recovering from injuries, they were living, breathing, fighting machines whose performance was directly tied to their physical conditioning. Your role, as the medicus, was to oversee their daily sustenance, ensuring they received the precise nourishment needed to fuel their intense training and grueling combat. This wasn't about culinary delight or varied meals. It was about optimizing human performance for violence and spectacle. It truly sucked to be a dietitian for a human battering ram. The Gladiator's diet. As highlighted in previous discussions, the brutal reality of being a gladiator in the Roman Empire. Chapter 5, and monotonous diet barley, beans, and bone ash. Chapter 5 of the brutal truth about gladiator training camps was surprisingly peculiar. It was almost entirely vegetarian. Their primary staple was barley hordeari, typically consumed as a thick, often bland, gruel or porridge, supplemented with beans or other legumes. Meat, if provided at all, was a rare luxury, served infrequently. Your precise task was to ensure this high-carbohydrate diet provided sufficient calories to fuel their immense physical exertion, pushing them to their limits daily without causing rapid weight loss. This specialized diet had several brutal, pragmatic purposes that you, the doctor, helped to enforce, building a protective layer of fat. The high-carbohydrate, plant-based diet helped gladiators develop a significant layer of subcutaneous fat. This wasn't about making them fat in an unhealthy sense that would hinder agility. Instead, this layer of fat acted as a kind of natural internal padding. When a sword or trident struck, this layer of fat was believed to absorb some of the impact, potentially preventing the weapon from immediately reaching vital muscles or organs, or at least making the wounds more superficial. For the Roman crowd, a gladiator bleeding profusely but continuing to fight was the ultimate entertainment. This fat layer helped facilitate those dramatic, yet not immediately fatal, injuries prolonging the spectacle. So you were literally optimizing their bodies to take a hit more spectacularly and bleed more impressively without dying too quickly. It truly sucked to literally fatten up your patients for a show. Promoting bone density. Archaeological evidence from gladiatorial cemeteries shows remarkably high bone density in gladiators, often denser than that of other Roman populations. This resilience was crucial for absorbing repeated impacts and blows in combat. As the doctor, you would likely oversee the consumption of a special concoction known as bone ash or calcium drink. This was a bitter, gritty liquid made from burned plant ashes rich in calcium and other minerals mixed with water or vinegar. You would administer this regularly, believing it strengthened their bones to withstand the immense impacts of combat and training, making them less prone to catastrophic fractures. Imagine prescribing a foul-tasting, gritty liquid made from burnt plant matter, knowing its unpalatable taste, but believing in its vital contribution to their resilience against blunt force trauma. It really sucked to prescribe charcoal water that tasted like disappointment. Sustained energy for endurance. Carbohydrates are excellent sources of sustained energy. The high-carb diet provided the necessary fuel for the gladiators' incredibly intense and prolonged training regimens, as discussed in Chapter 4, and for the physically demanding nature of arena combat. Your careful management of their caloric intake ensured they had the stamina for long fights, maximizing the entertainment value. However, despite these specific benefits for combat resilience, The gladiatorial diet was far from balanced by modern nutritional standards, leading to underlying health challenges. The limited variety and scarcity of certain nutrients had their own drawbacks. Subtle nutritional deficiencies, while providing ample calories and specific minerals. The diet could be deficient in other essential vitamins and minerals, e.g., some B vitamins. Specific amino acids, if not enough varied legumes were consumed, this could lead to subtle nutritional deficiencies over time, potentially affecting overall vitality and immune system. Even if not immediately obvious, your patients might have persistent fatigue or a general malaise that defied your understanding. Monotony and palate fatigue. Eating the same bland gruel and tough biscuits day after day for years on end would lead to profound palate fatigue and a deep sense of boredom with food. Meals were purely functional, a necessary fueling, rather than an enjoyable experience. This continuous lack of culinary pleasure added to the psychological misery of their confinement and constant training. Dental issues. While the high calcium intake might strengthen bones, the consumption of coarse, sometimes gritty, barley, especially if prepared with primitive grinding methods, could still contribute to dental wear. The lack of proper oral hygiene in the Ludus meant that dental problems, though perhaps different from those of the wider Roman population, were still a source of discomfort and potential infection. Exacerbating their overall health challenges, your role also extended to managing their general health and preventing common illnesses within the Ludus. In the cramped, unsanitary conditions of the gladiatorial school, as explored in Chapter 2, diseases spread rapidly. You would constantly battle against dysentery from contaminated food or water, various fevers, and chronic skin infections. Your interventions might include prescribing rudimentary herbal remedies for digestive issues, recommending basic hygiene practices like frequent hand washing. Though germ theory was unknown, or isolating sick gladiators if possible to prevent wider outbreaks. This was a constant, exhausting battle against invisible enemies that often claimed more lives than the arena itself. It truly sucked to fight a microbe war with herbs and luck, always knowing you were outnumbered. The dietary regimen was also designed to manage weight and energy. Gladiators needed to be powerful, but not overly heavy in a way that would hinder their agility. You would meticulously control their portions, ensuring they received enough calories for intense training and combat, but without becoming excessively sluggish. This delicate balance, dictated by the Lanastas' demands, was part of your daily oversight, constantly measuring their bodies for optimal performance. One common misconception is that all gladiators were treated as top-tier athletes with perfect diets and optimal health, while they were valuable assets, and their diet was specifically designed by ancient standards for their unique profession. Their overall well-being was secondary to their fighting performance. The primary concern was their ability to fight effectively and survive wounds, not necessarily their long-term health or comfort in retirement. The repetitive nature of their training and combat, combined with an often monotonous diet, led to unique health profiles that were different from other Roman populations. Archaeological studies of gladiatorial cemeteries like the one unearthed in Ephesus, Turkey, where precise dietary analysis of skeletal remains, particularly bone isotope analysis, has confirmed their primarily vegetarian, high carbohydrate, and high calcium diet, provide direct insights into their unique diet and health conditions. This osteological evidence strongly supports a diet rich in carbohydrates and calcium, consistent with ancient texts. Historians still meticulously study Roman medical texts like Galen's writings, which drew heavily from his experience in a gladiatorial school and philosophical discussions like Pliny the Elder's mention of gladiators as barley eaters, to reconstruct their precise diets, health, and physiological adaptations for combat. The question of how much these specific adaptations truly prolonged their fighting careers versus contributing to long-term hidden health problems remains a point of scholarly debate. Furthermore, the moral ambiguity of your position permeated even the seemingly benign act of managing their diet. You were carefully cultivating their bodies, optimizing their resilience, and ensuring their physical peak, all with the explicit knowledge that this perfection was to be used for brutal entertainment. Your medical skills, applied to their nutrition, were part of the dehumanizing process that transformed individuals into instruments of spectacle. Your commitment to their health was directly tied to their continued suffering, making every meal a grim paradox. The psychological toll of constantly overseeing a diet designed for physical durability in combat, knowing that this diet also contributed to their unique physical attributes like the fat layer for dramatic wounds, would be immense. You were responsible for optimizing them as fighting machines, not necessarily as healthy human beings. This constant conflict between the healer's natural inclination to promote well-being and the owner's demand for performance would be a source of persistent ethical distress. You were always aware that your knowledge, so potent for healing, was ultimately serving a system of exploitation, turning every dietary recommendation into a moral compromise. So, your work as a doctor for Roman gladiators extended to their diet and health management, a specialized and often morally compromising task. You fueled their bodies with unique, high-carb regimens and prescribed gritty calcium drinks, not for their holistic well-being, but to make them resilient combatants. This constant oversight, ensuring their bodies were optimized for the brutal realities of the arena, was a defining, profoundly horrifying aspect of your job, ensuring that your medical skills were inextricably linked to the perpetuation of human spectacle and exploitation, turning every dietary choice into a grim calculation for the Lanista's profit, even as you meticulously managed their diets and painstakingly mended their broken bones. Your life as a doctor for Roman gladiators was perpetually defined by a chilling, overarching reality: the Lanista's will. Forget the Hippocratic oath or ethical considerations. Your patients were mere property, and your medical decisions were ultimately dictated by profit, not compassion, making your job profoundly horrifying. Imagine the brutal dynamic in the Ludus infirmary. You were a skilled medicus, a professional dedicated to the art of healing. However, your services were not rendered to free individuals with their own desires and rights. Your patients, the gladiators, were almost universally slaves, condemned criminals, or indentured volunteers. They were property mancipia, valuable commodities in which the Lanista, the owner and manager of the gladiatorial school, had made a significant financial investment. Your medical decisions, therefore, were rarely your own. They were dictated by the cold calculus of the Lanista's ledger, ensuring his maximum return. It truly sucked to have your patients treated like livestock. The Lanista's primary goal was singular: to maximize his profit from his gladiators. This meant keeping them alive, yes, but more importantly, keeping them fighting, and fighting well, for as long as possible. Every medical decision you made was viewed through this lens, creating constant pressure and ethical dilemmas. Speed of recovery over completeness. The Lanista demanded his gladiators back in the arena as quickly as humanly possible. This often meant pushing them back into training or combat before they were fully and comfortably healed, risking re-injury, exacerbating existing conditions, or leading to chronic, debilitating pain. You might know a gladiator desperately needed weeks, even months, of uninterrupted rest to fully recover from a severe injury. But the lanista might demand he be ready in days or a couple of weeks, because a healthy fighter was a profit center and an idle one, a costly drain. Imagine sending a man back to the lists with a still healing fracture, a raw, partially closed wound, or a nagging internal injury, knowing it might shatter again upon impact or fester into a deadly infection in the brutal arena. Your medical intervention was often just a temporary patch-up, not a permanent cure. It really sucked to rush healing, knowing the true cost. Cost-effectiveness. Expensive or prolonged treatments, even if potentially more effective in the long term for the gladiator's well-being, might be explicitly rejected by the lanista in favor of cheaper, faster, or more rudimentary interventions. He would prioritize a quick fix that got the gladiator back into action over a more comprehensive and costly rehabilitation that might ensure a longer, healthier life. Your medical options were limited not just by the constraints of ancient knowledge, but by the financial bottom line. Imagine arguing for a costly herbal poultice or a longer period of rest, only to be told it was too expensive for a piece of marble that might die next week anyway. Life versus expendability for the lanista. A gladiator was an asset, a piece of living property to be utilized. If a gladiator was too severely injured to ever fight again, if his recovery was deemed too slow, too costly, or if he developed a permanent, debilitating disability that rendered him unfit for the spectacle, the lanista might simply order him killed, perhaps through euthanasia, a swift execution outside the arena, or being left to die by neglect or sold off for less valuable basic labor, agricultural work, manual hauling. Your role then shifted, horrifyingly, from healer to witness of execution, or silent accomplice in managing the disposal of a defective asset. Imagine the chilling moment the lanista would look at a crippled gladiator, a man you had fought to save, and simply say, "He's no longer useful." It really sucked to see a life ended because it wasn't profitable. The lanista's power over his gladiators was absolute. Virtually unchecked by external authority, he literally held the power of life and death, an authority granted to him by Roman law, as gladiators were slaves or under contracts of servitude that effectively surrendered their personal autonomy. This absolute power extended to their medical care. You, the doctor, were his employee, a skilled professional. But your medical expertise was utterly subservient to his will. Disobeying a lanista could lead to severe consequences for you, including loss of your position and thus your livelihood, financial ruin, or even physical punishment. This created a profound ethical abyss where your professional integrity as a healer clashed constantly, agonizingly, with the brutal demands of profit and entertainment. The moral compromise inherent in your job was immense and pervasive. You were patching up men, meticulously mending their bodies, only to send them back into a brutal arena where they might face horrific injuries or certain death for the entertainment of thousands. Every successful recovery you facilitated was a bittersweet victory. Knowing its true purpose, you were part of a system that systematically dehumanized individuals, turning them into spectacle. And your healing skills were an integral part of that dehumanization. You were a skilled professional, but your skills were commodified, valued for their ability to maximize profit from human suffering, making you a direct accomplice in their exploitation. It truly sucked to heal for more killing. One common misconception is that lanista were universally cruel and cared nothing for their gladiators. While many were undoubtedly ruthless businessmen, they also had a vested financial interest in keeping their gladiators alive and as healthy as possible within the brutal context of their profession. A dead gladiator was a financial loss, as was one too injured to fight. So, Laniste would invest in good food for their specific diet, solid training, and even highly skilled doctors like yourself, not out of compassion, but out of a pragmatic desire to protect their assets and maximize their fighting careers. This created a complex relationship where pragmatic care existed alongside brutal exploitation. A chilling paradox where the Lanista's care was ultimately self-serving. Historians still meticulously study Roman legal texts related to gladiators, on their status as infamia or property, economic records of gladiatorial schools when available, and literary accounts, Seneca's discussions of gladiator endurance, or Martial's epigrams to understand the precise financial incentives and managerial practices of Laniste, often revealing a calculating, profit-driven system that prioritized economic returns over human well-being. Furthermore, the psychological toll of witnessing the Lanista's cold calculations and having your medical decisions overruled by profit motives would be immense. You would constantly be aware that your patients were viewed as property, as disposable commodities, not as human beings with dignity or a right to long-term health. This forced detachment, this continuous confrontation with the commodification of human suffering, would lead to profound moral fatigue, cynicism, or deep psychological distress. You would likely become desensitized to the brutal realities around you as a coping mechanism, but this detachment would come at the cost of your own emotional well-being, leaving you a hardened, perhaps cynical, practitioner. Your mind would be a repository of gruesome images and desperate pleas, making true peace of mind elusive, transforming your noble calling into a perpetual nightmare where human life was a negotiable asset. The very act of giving a gladiator an effective painkiller or a powerful healing poultice might be seen as a financial decision by the Lanista, reducing downtime, ensuring a quicker return to the arena. This blurred the lines between genuine care and economic calculation, further complicating your ethical landscape. Your greatest successes as a healer were often also the greatest successes for the exploitative system you served, making every act of healing a tacit endorsement of the brutality. The power dynamic extended to your own person. You, the medicus, might be a freedman or even a citizen, but your livelihood was inextricably tied to the Lanista. He could dismiss you, fine you, or refuse to pay you if he was displeased with your results or if you failed to meet his demands for quick turnaround. This made you subservient to his economic will, ensuring that your professional autonomy was constantly undermined by the financial realities of the gladiatorial school. Your own freedom, in a subtle but profound way, was constrained by the very chains that bound your patients, forcing you into complicity. The unique knowledge you possessed, gained from treating such specific and horrific injuries, was invaluable, however. This knowledge was not for the advancement of humanity's health in a broad sense, but primarily for the perpetuation of the gladiatorial spectacle. Your anatomical insights, your surgical skills, your understanding of healing, all were employed to make the gladiatorial system more efficient, more profitable, and thus more enduring. The very medical advancements you made, refined by treating these brutal injuries, inadvertently contributed to the perpetuation of the very spectacle that caused such profound human suffering. This intellectual complicity was another layer of profound ethical discomfort, transforming your scientific skill into a tool for exploitation. So, your job as a doctor for Roman gladiators was profoundly horrifying because your patients were the Lanista's property, and your medical decisions were ultimately dictated by profit, not compassion, this brutal reality of commodified human life, where healing was merely a means to perpetuate a spectacle of violence, was a defining, profoundly miserable aspect of your profession, ensuring that your skilled hands were perpetually complicit in the brutal exploitation of human beings, making every act of healing a moral compromise. Even as your healing hands battled the relentless tide of infection and your mind struggled with the brutal logic of profit, your life as a doctor for Roman gladiators was perpetually overshadowed by a profound and inescapable moral burden, the ethical abyss of healing for more killing. Forget the Hippocratic oath as a guiding light. Your skills were inextricably twisted to serve a system of brutality, making your job profoundly horrifying. Imagine the constant internal conflict that gnawed at you, day and night. Even in the fleeting moments of rest, you were a medicus, a healer, trained to alleviate suffering, to save lives, and to restore health, yet to your patients. The gladiators were not treated as individuals with a right to well-being. They were commodities, instruments for public spectacle. Your very purpose, as defined by the Ludus, was to patch them up just enough to return them to an arena where they might be horrifically injured again or killed outright. Your healing hands were inextricably linked to the perpetuation of violence and exploitation, this profound betrayal of the healer's instinct. This constant act of sending men back to their doom would be a relentless psychological torment. It truly sucked to be a doctor who perpetuated suffering. The gladiators themselves, your patients, were caught in this brutal cycle. They endured immense pain and suffering, both in training and in combat. They suffered from debilitating chronic injuries, rampant infections, and often a pervasive sense of despair. They would look to you with desperate eyes, clinging to your knowledge and your skill, their only hope for relief, and you, the healer, would administer your best care, providing what comfort you could, knowing that your success in treating them meant not freedom or a comfortable life, but a terrifying return to the blood-soaked sand of the arena. This profound irony, this constant moral dissonance between your professional calling and your actual practice, was a source of agonizing internal struggle. The very concept of medical ethics, as we understand it today, was warped and corrupted in the context of the gladiatorial school. While some ancient physicians certainly held ethical considerations like those in the Hippocratic tradition, which emphasized do no harm, the absolute power of the lanista over his property, the gladiators meant that your ethical autonomy was severely limited. You could not refuse to treat. You could not refuse to treat a gladiator who was destined for the arena, however gravely injured. If the lanista demanded it, demand extended rest. You could not demand extended rest for a patient if the lanista deemed it unprofitable to keep an idle gladiator. Your professional judgment was subservient to economic gain. Prioritize long-term health. Your primary focus was rapid, functional recovery for combat, not necessarily the gladiator's long-term comfort, quality of life in retirement if it ever came, or holistic well-being. Refuse to send back. You could not refuse to send a gladiator back to fight if he was deemed fit by the lanista, even if you knew he was still in pain or at high risk of re-injury. This profound ethical abyss, this constant clash between your healing instinct and your professional obligation to exploit, ensured your moral compass was perpetually pulled in two agonizing directions. You were a skilled professional, but your skills were commodified, valued solely for their ability to maximize profit from human suffering, making you an integral part of their exploitation. It truly sucked to heal for more killing. This ethical burden often manifested in specific, chilling ways, treating for performance, not well-being. Your success was measured by how quickly you could get a gladiator back into the lists, not by his long-term health. This meant prioritizing quick fixes, even if they compromised long-term recovery or caused chronic pain. A gladiator might be put back into combat with a still healing fracture, a raw, partially closed wound, or a nagging internal injury, risking catastrophic re-injury or death. Simply because the alienista needed him to fight, your medical intervention merely delayed the inevitable or prolonged the agony. Witnessing forced combat and execution. You would patch up 2 gladiators after a brutal fight, perhaps both severely injured, only for the lanista or the crowd to demand one or both return to continue fighting to the death. Your medical intervention merely delayed the inevitable or prolonged the suffering. You were forced to witness the ultimate fate of your patients, knowing your healing skills had led them to this brutal end. The disposable asset. When a gladiator was too severely injured to ever fight again, or if his recovery was deemed too slow and costly, the lanista might order his death or sale for less valuable labor. Your skills, which could save a life, were then bypassed in favor of cold economic calculation. You might witness these decisions, powerless to intervene, forced to accept the brutal reality that your patients were expendable. Your medical knowledge was useless against the demands of profit, the direct link to profit. Every successful treatment, every repaired limb, every healed infection meant a financial gain for the lanista. Your healing directly contributed to the profitability of a system built on human suffering. This direct link between your medical skill and the exploitation of your patients created a profound moral stain on your profession, making you a willing or unwilling accomplice in the very brutality you tried to alleviate. The psychological toll of constantly operating in this ethical void would be immense. You would grapple with profound moral distress, possibly leading to cynicism, desensitization, or self-loathing. The dissonance between your healer's instinct to preserve life and your professional obligations to perpetuate a spectacle of death would be a constant, gnawing conflict. You would live with the memory of the suffering you witnessed, the pain you inflicted even in healing, and the lives you sent back to fight, knowing their likely grim fate. This erosion of your compassion, however necessary for survival in your profession, would leave indelible scars on your psyche, making true peace of mind elusive. It really sucked to sacrifice your soul for your job. One common misconception is that ancient Roman doctors had a strong, unified ethical code, akin to the modern Hippocratic oath that always prioritized the patient's well-being above all else, while principles of beneficence, doing good, and non-maleficence, doing no harm, were part of some Greek and Roman medical traditions. The specific context of gladiatorial medicine, where patients were property, introduced unique and severe ethical challenges. There was no overarching legal or professional body to enforce patient rights against a powerful owner like the lanista. Galen, in his writings, while advocating for best practices, also subtly acknowledges the pragmatic realities and economic considerations of his work in a gladiatorial school. Hinting at these very ethical dilemmas without explicitly condemning the system, his focus was on practical results for the lanista, which inevitably influenced his treatment decisions. Historians still meticulously study Roman legal texts related to slavery and infamia, the social disgrace of gladiators, philosophical discussions on human dignity, and Galen's own medical writings like De Dignocentia, Pulsus or de Hippocrates et Platonis Decretis, to understand the precise ethical frameworks that guided Roman physicians in different contexts, often finding a complex interplay between ideals and grim realities, confirming the challenging moral landscape. Furthermore, your knowledge itself became a tool of oppression. Your anatomical insights, your surgical skills, your understanding of healing, all were employed to make the gladiatorial system more efficient, more profitable, and thus more enduring. The very advancements you made in trauma medicine, refined by treating these brutal injuries, inadvertently contributed to the perpetuation of the very spectacle that caused such suffering. This intellectual complicity, this use of scientific knowledge to enhance exploitation, was another layer of profound ethical discomfort, transforming your skill into a double-edged sword. The isolation of your profession further exacerbated this ethical burden. You were likely one of the few individuals within the Ludus, apart from perhaps a few trusted assistants, who truly understood the depth of the gladiators' suffering and the moral compromises of the system. This made it difficult to confide in others or to seek moral support, leaving you to bear the weight of your ethical dilemmas largely alone. Your compassionate side, if it persisted, was a solitary burden, a silent agony in the face of pervasive brutality. The psychological impact of witnessing the Lanistas' cold calculations and having your medical decisions overruled by profit motives would be immense. You would constantly be aware that your patients were viewed as property, as disposable commodities, not as human beings with dignity or a right to long-term health. This forced detachment, this continuous confrontation with the commodification of human suffering, would lead to moral fatigue, cynicism, or profound psychological distress. You were intimately involved in their suffering, yet ultimately powerless to truly advocate for their well-being beyond what served the Lanistas' interests. The ultimate tragedy was that you, the healer, who held the power to alleviate pain and save lives, were trapped in a system that demanded you serve cruelty and prolong suffering for the sake of entertainment. Your noble calling was twisted, your compassion tested, and your very soul confronted with an ethical abyss. Day after day, in the blood-soaked reality of the Ludus. So, your job as a doctor for Roman gladiators was profoundly horrifying due to the inescapable ethical abyss of healing for more killing. Your immense medical skill was inextricably linked to the brutal exploitation of human life, forcing you to patch up broken bodies only to send them back to almost certain death for entertainment. This constant moral compromise, this profound dissonance between your healer's instinct and your professional obligation, was a defining, profoundly miserable aspect of your job, ensuring that your compassionate hands operated in a perpetual state of misery and blood-soaked complicity, transforming your noble calling into a horrifying nightmare. You've embarked on a grim calling, stepping into the Ludus infirmary, a place of filth and despair. You faced a horrifying gallery of brutal wounds, deep gashes, shattered bones, internal trauma, and performed primitive surgeries with crude tools and no anesthesia. You battled the unseen, relentless enemy of infection, knowing sepsis and tetanus could claim lives more surely than any blade. You mastered the brutal art of mending bones, patching up bodies just enough for more combat. You oversaw a peculiar diet, fueling fighters for performance, not holistic health. You lived under the Lanistas' unyielding will, where your patients were property and profit dictated your every medical decision. And finally, you grappled with the profound ethical abyss of healing men only to send them back to almost certain death for entertainment. As the distant roar of the arena fades and the phantom smell of stale blood dissipates, a profound, lingering truth settles upon you. Your job as a doctor for Roman gladiators was not just horrifying. It was a profound ethical abyss, a profession of vital skill inextricably linked to and defined by the brutal exploitation of human life, leaving a legacy of immense moral ambiguity, a profession of paradox, healing for exploitation. Consider the fundamental contradiction at the heart of your profession. You were a medicus, a healer by training and presumably by inclination. Your purpose was to alleviate suffering, to mend the broken, and to preserve life. Yet, the very context of your work forced you to betray these core tenets. Your patients were gladiators, men condemned to fight for entertainment, their bodies mere commodities in a brutal spectacle. Every successful stitch, every reset bone, every healed infection was a victory not for the gladiators' freedom or well-being, but for the last as profit and the crowd's continued amusement. Your healing hands were part of the machinery of exploitation, making you a vital, yet morally compromised cog in a system of violence. It truly sucked to heal for more hurting, the relentless grind pain, filth, and constant threat. Then there's the unrelenting physical and environmental brutality you endured. Your medical office was a cramped, unsanitary, dimly lit infirmary, perpetually filled with the stench of stale blood and suffering. You performed agonizing surgeries with crude, unsterilized tools, inflicting further trauma without effective pain relief. You battled invisible enemies like sepsis and tetanus, which claimed lives more surely than any arena blade. In an environment where hygiene was a foreign concept, your body and senses were constantly assaulted by the sights, sounds, and smells of extreme suffering, ensuring that your daily practice was a relentless battle against filth, pain, and ubiquitous death. It truly sucked to be perpetually surrounded by agony. Patient as property, the Lannista's absolute will. And what about the dehumanization of your patients? Gladiators were property, not people with rights. Your medical treatment was dictated by their value as assets, not by their human dignity. The Lannista's will was absolute. He demanded rapid recoveries for quick returns to the arena, often overriding your best medical judgment. Cost-effectiveness trumped comprehensive care. If a gladiator was too injured, too old, or too expensive to maintain, he was simply discarded, executed, or sold for lesser labor. You were part of this cold economic calculation, forced to treat bodies as mere containers for fighting prowess, their lives contingent on their profitability. It truly sucked to see lives valued only for their entertainment. The ethical abyss, healing for more killing. Finally, the inescapable ethical abyss that defined your calling. You were patching up men, meticulously mending their bodies, only to send them back into a brutal arena where they might face horrific injuries or certain death for entertainment. This constant moral dissonance between your healer's instinct to preserve life and your professional obligation to perpetuate a spectacle of death was a profound source of agony. Your compassion was tested daily, your empathy constantly challenged. The knowledge that your skills ultimately served cruelty rather than genuine well-being transformed your noble profession into a haunting nightmare, ensuring your profound complicity in their exploitation. It truly sucked to sacrifice your soul for your job, a complex legacy medical, progress forged in brutality. The legacy of the medicus gladiatorum in Roman history is complex and deeply unsettling, while often overlooked or romanticized. They represent a unique intersection of advanced medical knowledge for their time, social hierarchy, and brutal exploitation. Their work, though vital to the gladiatorial games, highlights the pervasive nature of Roman slavery and the lengths to which an empire would go to maintain its spectacles. Your skill, though professional, was often utilized in a context that was morally indefensible by modern standards, leaving behind a chilling historical footprint. The advancements in trauma medicine, surgical techniques, and anatomical understanding, achieved by figures like Galen through treating gladiators, paradoxically emerged from the very crucible of human suffering they sought to alleviate. This makes their contribution a profound, if morally ambiguous, testament to medical progress. Historians still meticulously study Roman medical texts, surgical instruments found in archaeological sites, and biographical accounts of physicians like Galen's first-hand observations to understand the precise capabilities and ethical frameworks of doctors working in specialized, often brutal, contexts like the gladiatorial Ludus, consistently revealing a pragmatic, profit-driven approach that sometimes clashed with holistic healing. The psychological toll. A Dr. T. haunted by his calling. The psychological toll of your job was immense. You were constantly surrounded by agonizing pain, severe injuries, and the pervasive reality of death. The smells, the sights, the sounds of suffering would be a daily assault on your senses. This continuous exposure to extreme trauma, combined with the ethical compromises of your profession, would lead to profound psychological distress, moral fatigue, or a chilling desensitization. Your mind would be a repository of gruesome images and desperate pleas, making true peace of mind elusive, transforming your noble calling into a perpetual nightmare where human life was a negotiable asset. You were, perhaps, more haunted than your patients after the show was over. Ultimately, your life as a doctor for Roman gladiators was a testament to immense skill deployed in an ethical abyss. It was a profession defined by brutal injuries, primitive medical tools, and the constant threat of infection, all within an environment where patients were property. You healed for profit, not always for compassion, ensuring that your vital medical knowledge was inextricably linked to the dehumanizing spectacle of gladiatorial combat. Your legacy, for all its medical advancements, remains profoundly horrifying and morally ambiguous, a chilling reminder of the dark side of Roman glory as you now drift into a deep, comforting sleep. Let the distant cries of the arena and the imagined stench of the infirmary finally subside. You are safe in your own time, far removed from the brutal realities of ancient medicine. May your dreams be peaceful, filled with the quiet certainty of modern medical ethics, compassionate care, and the profound freedom to heal without compromise. A stark contrast to the horrifying truth we've explored tonight. And now, good night, and have sweet dreams.